My husband and I built this house with our bare hands. Every brick carried our sweat, every wall held our laughter. It was supposed to be our legacy, our gift to our children. But years later, my own son stood in this same living room, his wife smirking beside him, and told me I would have to pay rent in the home I built. My heart cracked, my voice shook, but what I discovered next changed everything. I remember the first day we stepped inside this home. It was nothing but empty rooms, raw concrete, and dust. My husband squeezed my hand, smiling, and said, "One day this will be filled with life," and it was. The years passed with children's footsteps running through the halls, the smell of fresh bread in the kitchen, the sound of my husband humming as he fixed the leaky roof. This house wasn't just walls and ceilings, it was us, our love, our blood. When my husband passed away, I felt the house grow heavier. The silence was unbearable. The garden wilted, the laughter faded. But I told myself, "You're not alone. Your son will take care of you." And for a while he did. Rashid, my only son, moved in with his wife, Samira. They said it was to support me, but really I was supporting them. They were young, still trying to find their place. I opened my doors, my kitchen, my heart. I welcomed them with open arms, the way any mother would. I cooked for them. I cleaned for them. I even looked after their babies so they could work. At first, it felt like family again. We shared meals at the table. Samira laughed at my stories. Rashid hugged me every night before bed, and my grandson's little hands clung to me like I was his whole world. My heart swelled with pride. I thought, this is what my husband wanted. His home alive with generations under one roof. But soon, the cracks began to show. It started small. Samira would make little remarks. "Your cooking is too oily," she'd say, pushing away her plate. Or, "This furniture is outdated. You should let us redecorate." At first, I laughed it off. I thought she was just young, with modern tastes, but the tone sharpened, the words cut deeper. One evening, while I was folding laundry, I overheard her whispering to Rashid in the next room. "We can't keep living like this. It's her house. We need to make it ours." My heart froze. I told myself I misheard, that my son would never let his wife speak like that. But slowly, Rashid changed too. He stopped asking how I was. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. When I told him stories about his father, he rolled his eyes and muttered, "That was a long time ago, Ma. Let it go." His words felt like daggers. Still, I clung to hope. I reminded myself, he's my son. Blood doesn't betray blood. One afternoon, I was in the garden when the mailman handed me an envelope. It was addressed to Rashid. I almost put it aside, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, my hands trembled. It was a refinancing notice, papers with my address, my house, but nowhere was my name, only Rashid's. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened. My husband's voice echoed in my mind. "Never let anyone take this house from you." I confronted Rashid that night. "What is this?" I demanded, waving the papers. He looked startled, then annoyed. "It's nothing, Ma, just some financial stuff. Don't worry about it." Samira stood beside him, smirking. "He's the man of the house now. You should let him handle things." Man of the house. The words stung. This was the house my husband built, the house I had poured my life into. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself they were just trying to help. But then the coldness began. Suddenly, Samira didn't want me in the kitchen. "You'll just make a mess," she'd snap, slamming the cabinet doors. Rashid stopped eating the food I cooked. They began to lock their bedroom door, whispering behind it. My grandson, once glued to my side, was now pulled away whenever he tried to run to me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Then came the night everything shattered. They called me into the living room. Rashid looked tense, his jaw tight. Samira, as usual, wore that triumphant smirk. On the table was a stack of papers. Rashid's voice was cold, unfamiliar. "From now on, Ma, you'll have to pay rent if you want to stay here." I froze. Rent? In my own home? I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke, but his eyes were stone. Samira crossed her arms, adding, "It's only fair. You live here. You use the electricity, the water, nothing is free. Her words echoed in my head. Nothing is free. I wanted to scream, to tear the papers apart, to remind them whose blood and sweat built these walls. But my voice cracked. All I managed was a whisper. This is my house, mine. Samira laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh that still haunts me. Not anymore. My grandson peeked from the hallway, his little eyes wide with confusion. My heart broke all over again. What kind of example were they setting for him? To disrespect, to discard the very hands that raised you? My knees buckled, my hands shook as I clutched the papers. My son, my own flesh and blood, looked at me as if I were nothing, as if I were a burden to be handled. That night, I sat in my room staring at the walls. My husband's picture on the nightstand seemed to stare back at me. I whispered to it, my voice trembling, "They want me gone. They want to erase me. But what do I do now?" I felt trapped, humiliated, alone. The house that once held warmth now pressed down on me like a prison. But then, as I sat in the darkness, I noticed something. A small crack in the stack of papers they'd given me. Something they overlooked. A detail that might just change everything. And that was the moment. I realized this fight wasn't over, but what I discovered next changed everything. The morning after they handed me those rent papers, everything felt different. The air in the house was heavy, like the walls themselves had turned against me. I walked into the kitchen, hoping to make tea, but Samira was already there. She slammed the cupboard shut and glared at me. "Didn't we tell you last night? This isn't your space anymore. Stay out of the kitchen unless we say so." Her words sliced through me. My kitchen, the kitchen I had designed, where I had cooked every meal for decades, suddenly wasn't mine. I turned away, swallowing the lump in my throat. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the table for support. Rashid walked in, his eyes darting between us. For a moment, I thought he'd defend me. He didn't. He looked down, grabbed his keys, and left without a word. I wanted to call after him, to remind him of the little boy who used to sit on the counter while I kneaded dough, flour covering his face as he laughed. But that boy was gone, replaced by this man who couldn't even look at me. The days grew colder, even though it was summer. Samira began leaving her mess for me to clean, then complained I was too slow. When I tried to watch television in the living room, she snapped, "Go to your room, you're disturbing me." Rashid never stopped her. Sometimes he joined in. "Ma, you have to understand. Things are different now. You can't expect to live here for free." For free. Those words burned in my chest. I wanted to scream, "This is my house." But my voice always cracked under the weight of their cruelty. One evening, I came back from the market with a bag of vegetables. Samira met me at the door, her arms crossed. "Did you use our money to buy that?" I stared at her, stunned. "I used my pension, my money." She rolled her eyes. "Your pension barely covers anything. You're lucky we even let you stay here. If it were up to me, you'd be out already." I froze, my heart hammering. I looked at Rashid standing behind her. "Is that true? Would you throw me out?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any words. That night, I cried into my pillow. Silent sobs because I didn't want them to hear. I felt humiliated, betrayed. The boy I raised, the man I sacrificed for, had turned me into a stranger. The neighbors began to notice. At a small gathering, Samira joked loudly. "Oh, she just rents with us now. She's basically our tenant." People laughed. My face burned. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. The whispers that followed cut deeper than any knife. "Poor old woman, can't even keep her house." But the worst pain came from my grandson. He used to run into my arms every morning. Now, whenever he tried, Samira yanked him back. "Don't bother, Grandma, she's tired." Slowly, he stopped coming. He stopped asking for my stories, my songs. His little eyes, once filled with love, began to mirror his parents' coldness. One night, I caught him whispering, "Mama says Grandma doesn't own this house anymore." My heart shattered. What poison were they feeding him? The betrayal deepened. Rashid began leaving bills on my table. Electricity, water, gas. "If you live here, you have to contribute." He said it so casually, like it was normal. Like I hadn't already spent a lifetime paying for this place. I tried to reason with him. Son, this house was built by your father and me. It's ours, not yours to claim. But he only sneered. You wouldn't understand, Ma. Times are different now. You should be grateful we're even letting you stay. Grateful. That word stung worse than any slap. Samira grew bolder. She began threatening me openly. One day we'll change the locks and you'll find yourself on the street. Then what will you do? I wanted to say I'd fight, that I'd never let them win. But the truth was, I felt powerless. My health wasn't what it used to be. My hands ached. My body was tired. And emotionally, I was breaking. I found myself eating less, speaking less. I stayed in my room most of the time just to avoid them. The house felt smaller, suffocating like a cage. Then came the final humiliation. It was a Sunday morning. I was sitting quietly, sipping tea I'd made in secret when they both stormed into my room. Rashid threw an envelope on my lap. From next month, you pay rent, officially. We've written up an agreement. Sign it. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a typed contract. My name typed under the word tenant. I stared at it, my vision blurring. My husband's face flashed in my mind, the way he used to hold me when life was hard. I whispered, "How could you do this to me, Rashid?" His eyes were cold. "It's just business, Ma. Don't make it emotional." Samira chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "If you don't like it, you can leave. There are plenty of old-age homes waiting for people like you." My body shook with rage, but my voice trembled as I said, "This is my house. I will never leave." Samira laughed, that cruel laugh again. "We'll see about that." They left, slamming the door behind them. The papers sat heavy in my lap. My tears soaked the ink. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My chest ached, my mind spun. I felt utterly broken. They had stripped me of dignity, of respect, of family. My own blood had turned against me. But then, something inside me hardened. I thought about the refinancing notice, the deed I had tucked away years ago. I thought about the whispers I overheard, the smugness in Samira's laugh, the arrogance in Rashid's eyes. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was weak, but they didn't know me. I wiped my tears, sat up straight, and whispered into the darkness, "You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." The night they shoved that contract in my lap, I thought my world had ended. I sat in the dark, staring at the word tenant under my name. Tenant, in the home I built with my husband. My chest hurt so badly I thought my heart might give out. I felt useless, powerless, abandoned. I didn't eat for 2 days. The neighbors knocked, but I pretended I was asleep. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, weak, humiliated. Even my grandson avoided me now, his little eyes confused, his words poisoned by his parents' lies. One evening, I walked outside into the garden, the same garden where my husband and I once planted roses. The flowers were gone now, just weeds and dry soil. I sat on the broken bench, tears rolling down my cheeks, whispering into the night. What am I supposed to do? I almost gave up. I almost believed what Samira had said, that maybe I did belong in an old-age home. Maybe it was time to disappear, but then something caught my eye, the old trunk, half buried under dust in the corner of the shed. I hadn't opened it in years. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The lock was rusty, but it gave way with a crack. Inside, beneath faded blankets and yellowed papers, I found it. The deed, the original property deed. My name, my husband's name, staring back at me in bold letters. Proof. Solid proof that this house was mine. My breath caught, my tears turned to fire. For the first time in months, I felt alive. I clutched the paper to my chest. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. This house will always be yours. Don't let anyone take it from you. I knew then what I had to do, but I couldn't rush. I had to be smart. They already thought I was weak, useless. That was my advantage. If they underestimated me, they wouldn't see me coming. The next morning, I acted normal. I made tea, I kept quiet, I let Samira mock me. Rashid tossed bills on my table and I nodded silently. Inside, I was burning, but on the outside, I was calm. A shadow of myself. That very afternoon, I walked quietly to an old friend's house, Yasmin. She had been my neighbor for decades. Her brother worked in law. I showed them the deed, my hands shaking. They gasped. "This house is yours. No one can take that from you. If your son tried to refinance it without your consent, that's fraud." Fraud. The word rang in my ears. I sat there stunned. My own son, committing fraud against his mother. Yasmin's brother looked me in the eye. "Do you want to fight this?" For a moment, fear choked me. Rashid was my son. Taking him to court when wasn't that unthinkable? Wouldn't people say I was destroying my own family? But then I remembered the humiliation, Samira's cruel laughter, Rashid's cold eyes, the contract with tenant stamped under my name. Yes, I would fight. We began to prepare. The lawyer explained everything I needed to gather: evidence, witnesses, records. I told him everything, every detail, every insult, every attempt to push me out. He listened patiently, shaking his head in disbelief. Meanwhile, back at home, I played the role of the defeated old woman. I shuffled around, quiet and obedient. I pretended to calculate my pension money for rent. Samira laughed, bragging to the neighbors. She knows her place now. If only she knew. At night in my room, I spread the papers on my bed. The deed, the forged refinancing notices, the so-called rent contract. My hands no longer trembled with fear. They shook with determination. I thought of my grandson, of the day he whispered, "Mama says you don't own this house." I clenched my fists and swore he would know the truth. He would know his grandmother wasn't weak. I wasn't going to let them erase me. The turning point wasn't just finding the deed, it was finding myself again. The woman who had worked side by side with her husband, who had raised a son alone, who had endured loss and hardship and still survived. They thought they could break me. They were wrong. As I tucked the deed safely into my bag, I whispered to myself, "You've played your game long enough. Now it's my turn." The day of reckoning came sooner than they expected. It began quietly. One morning, while Samira berated me for forgetting to sweep the living room, I just nodded and smiled. She smirked, satisfied with my silence. But inside, I was laughing, because I knew something they didn't. The summons had already been delivered. They were going to court. When Rashid opened the envelope later that week, his face drained of color. I was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when I heard his voice boom through the house. "May, what have you done?" I looked up, my hands steady, my voice calm. "I did what I had to. I spoke to the judge." Samira snatched the paper from him, her eyes darting across the words. Fraud, property, illegal refinancing, court appearance required. Her lips trembled, then twisted into fury. "You old witch, you'll regret this," she spat. But for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I met her eyes and said, "No, Samira, you will." The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. I sat at the front with my lawyer clutching the deed in my lap. Rashid avoided my gaze, his jaw tight, his hands sweating. Samira, in her flashy clothes, kept whispering into his ear, glaring at me like I was some criminal. But today the roles were reversed. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer laid out the evidence. The original deed with my husband's and my name, the fraudulent refinancing attempts, the so-called rent contract. Every detail was clear, undeniable. Then it was Rashid's turn. He stumbled over his words, trying to paint me as forgetful, unstable. "She doesn't understand finances anymore," he said. "We were just helping her manage the house." The judge's eyes narrowed. By forcing her to pay rent in her own home? By committing financial fraud in her name? Rashid's voice cracked. Samira clutched his arm, but even she couldn't mask her fear. The gallery murmured. Neighbors who had come to watch were whispering, shaking their heads. Their shame was no longer private, it was public. And then came the moment I had waited for. The judge turned to me. "Do you have anything to say, madam?" I rose slowly, every bone in my body trembling with emotion, but my voice rang out strong. This house, I said, holding up the deed, was built with my husband's hands and mine. We sacrificed everything for it, and my own son tried to strip it from me, to make me a tenant in the only home I've ever known. He thought my age made me weak, but today I stand here to say I am not weak, and I will not be erased. Gasps filled the room. Rashid looked away. Samira's face twisted in rage. The judge banged the gavel. The deed is valid. The property remains with the rightful owner, the plaintiff. All fraudulent actions taken in her name are void. And as for you, Mr. Rashid, he paused, his voice hard as steel. You should be ashamed. The gavel fell again, case closed. The fallout was immediate. Rashid couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his disgrace. Samira stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clattering like gunshots. The neighbors whispered, their pity for me turning into respect, their admiration simmering in every glance. When we arrived home, the silence was deafening. For the first time, they didn't dare order me around. They didn't dare insult me. My grandson ran to me, hugging my waist tightly. "Grandma," he whispered, "is it true? The house is yours." I knelt, stroking his hair. "Yes, child, it always was." And though Rashid stood in the doorway, eyes red, lips pressed tight, he said nothing. He had lost. Not just the case, but the moral authority, the respect, the power he thought was his by right. But this wasn't just revenge. It was justice. As I closed my bedroom door that night, I looked around the house. My house. Every wall, every brick, every memory was safe again. I had taken back what was mine, not with anger, not with violence, but with truth. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end. Families don't heal overnight. Trust doesn't magically return. But one thing was certain. They would never look at me as powerless again. I smiled to myself in the dark. For the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. But little did I know. The real test of what came next was only beginning. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Days passed, and I could feel the shift. Rashid avoided me, his pride broken, his shame hanging over him like a storm cloud. Samira kept her distance, no longer barking orders. No longer demanding rent, but her glares told me she hadn't forgiven me. But forgiveness was never my goal. Justice was. I reclaimed my space. I cooked in my kitchen without being scolded. I tended my garden without being mocked. I sat in the living room, my living room, without being told I was trespassing. Every small act of freedom felt like a victory, and slowly people noticed. Neighbors began visiting again, bringing food, offering kind words. "We heard what you did," one said, smiling proudly. "You stood up for yourself. We're glad you didn't let them win." Their respect warmed me more than I expected. For so long, I had felt invisible. Now, I felt seen. But the most unexpected change came from my grandson. He no longer looked at me with pity or confusion. He looked at me with admiration. He followed me to the garden, asked me about my recipes, listened when I told him stories of the past. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he whispered, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be brave like you." My heart swelled. That moment alone was worth every battle I had fought. As for Rashid, the cracks only grew deeper. He tried to carry on, pretending nothing had changed, but everyone knew. At the mosque, men avoided his gaze. At family gatherings, whispers followed him. His reputation, the one he valued more than love, was in ruins. And Samira? She eventually packed her things and left for a while, unable to bear the humiliation. She returned later, quieter, less cruel, but the damage was done. She knew she had lost. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to strike back with the same cruelty they used on me. The truth had spoken louder than anything else. One night, as I sat alone, watching the flicker of a candle in the dark, I thought of my husband. I imagined his hand on mine, his voice telling me, "You did well. You protected what we built." And in that moment, I felt peace. This wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity, about standing up even when the world calls you weak, about showing that no matter your age, your voice still matters. So when people ask me what happened, I tell them simply they demanded rent from me in the home I built. So I called the judge. And that was the day they realized I was not a burden. I was the foundation they tried to bury. And that, my dear, is the truth.